it was Passover time for the Hebrew people. And that meant that Jerusalem and the outlying suburbs were packed with people. Jewish historians living at that time, like Josephus, tell us that about every other year the Romans would conduct a census of the people coming into the city of Jerusalem. The reason why the Romans would conduct this census was that they wanted to know how many people were going to be in the city so that they could have enough military presence to keep the peace, to make sure that things were secure. Josephus tells us that the results of that census that took place about every other year were amazing because it showed that there were about 2.5 million people who packed the city of Jerusalem every Passover. I had no idea that many people would come into the city of Jerusalem. 2.5 million, according to the Roman census. Now, Jewish law mandated that every male Jew living within a 20-mile radius of the city of Jerusalem had to go to the city of Jerusalem and celebrate the Passover in the temple. And from what we can tell, almost every one of those Jewish males in that 20-mile radius followed the law. And not only did they come, but they brought their families with them. And not only did those families come, but Jews from throughout the Mediterranean world also tried their best to come to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover. Now, Jesus and his disciples also wanted to go to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover. But unlike everyone else, Jesus had another motive for going into the city of Jerusalem. Jesus' motive was that he wanted to make a statement about who he was. And so Matthew tells us that Jesus arranged ahead of time to go into the city on a donkey. Matthew tells us that a colt also tagged along. Matthew's the only one who mentions Jesus coming into the city on a donkey with a colt tagging along. The other gospel writers don't mention that colt. But Jesus clearly arranged for the use of that donkey ahead of time. And so he tells his disciples, go into the city and go to this place and get that donkey and bring it here so I can ride into the city on it. Now, to make sure that there was no slip-ups, Jesus gives his disciples a password to use. Did you notice that? The password was, the Lord has need of them. So the disciples followed Jesus' instructions. And they go in, they get the donkey, they come out. Jesus gets on the donkey, and then he heads into the city of Jerusalem. But before we take a look at the statement that Jesus was trying to make with his dramatic entry into the city, we need to back up just for a second. You see, before Jesus, there was a long prophetic line of prophets who at times would use drama to make a statement. They would use drama to convey a message, especially if they sensed that no one was listening to their words. And so they get dramatic, and they do some dramatic things to get people's attention, to kind of help them reflect. For example, the prophet Amos was preaching about righteousness and justice. And he could tell that the people just weren't getting his message. And so one day, Amos decided to get dramatic. And so he secured a carpenter's drum. And as everyone watched, Amos paraded down the streets of the city of Jerusalem, holding up the carpenter's plumb line to all the major institutions of the city, including the temple. His dramatic gesture conveyed to the people that these institutions, including the temple, were not plumb. They were not just. Amos used drama a lot. And then there was Jeremiah. Jeremiah also used drama. When Jeremiah sensed that the Babylonians were coming and they were to surround the city of Jerusalem and destroy it, he told the people that, but they didn't listen. And so one day Jeremiah decided to use drama to get that message across. And so he got an oxen's yoke. And he put it on himself. And he starts parading down the streets of Jerusalem in this oxen's yoke. And of course the symbolism was caught. Jeremiah was demonstrating through drama that everyone would soon be in bondage and in slavery, yoked, if you will, to the Babylonians. And then there was Ezekiel. Those of you who studied Ezekiel with me know that Ezekiel was extremely dramatic. And when Ezekiel sensed that doom was coming to him and his people, Ezekiel packed all his belongings, drug them all out to the fortified city wall. And there with his belongings left to the side, Ezekiel started to dig a hole in the city wall. And once he dug a hole all the way through the wall, he took his belongings and pitched them through the hole, and then he crawled through the hole to demonstrate that he was fleeing from the bondage that was soon going to be coming. Prophets use drama to convey a message. And that's exactly what Jesus was doing on Palm Sunday, the day that he went into the city. He was using drama to convey a message, using drama to make a statement. And the statement that Jesus was trying to make was that he was indeed the Messiah. Now, many weeks before that, Jesus came right out and told his disciples that he was the Messiah, but he said, don't tell anyone. Why did Jesus not want his disciples to share that message? Well, I think Jesus wanted to say that message for Palm Sunday, wanted to say that message for Jerusalem. And so Jesus goes into the city in dramatic form, trying to convey to everyone that he was the Messiah. Now, he made some strategic decisions to make that statement. First off, Jesus entered the city through the eastern gate. That gate was called the Golden Gate. It was called the Golden Gate because Ezekiel, the prophet that I mentioned earlier, long before had said, someday, God's glory will come into the city of Jerusalem through the eastern gate. Jesus knew that. So out of all the gates, he strategically chooses the eastern gate to enter. Many psalmists also declared that it was through the eastern gate that someday God's righteousness would come into the city. So again, Jesus chose the eastern gate. He chose to come on the back of a donkey. Chose to come in the midst of people waving palm branches, which, by the way, probably was initiated by his disciples and then quickly caught on. Now, why would he come on the back of a donkey? Well, again, Jesus knew that kings coming in peace would ride on the back of a donkey. And many times those kings were greeted by palm branches. being weighed. So again, strategic decisions are made on the part of Jesus and his disciples. Why? To demonstrate through symbolism that Jesus was the Messiah. That's the first message that we can learn from this story. Amen? Amen. Now there's another message that we can also learn from this story. And that message has to do with obstacles and opportunity. For Jesus' disciples, Jerusalem was an obstacle, to be avoided at all costs. Why? Because, you see, the disciples knew that Jesus had been warned not to go into the city of Jerusalem. The disciples knew that if Jesus went into the city of Jerusalem, it would probably cost him his life. And so the disciples were trying to do their very best to keep Jesus from going into the city. But while the disciples are trying to keep Jesus from going into the city, Jesus is doing what? He's planning his strategic entrance into the city. Why? Well, we've already said, to make the statement about who he was. But there's another reason. Jesus did not see the city of Jerusalem as an obstacle. He saw it as an opportunity. With me so far? An opportunity to what? To reach 2.5 million people. Whew, that's a big crowd. That's a huge platform. So Jesus didn't see the obstacle. He saw the opportunity. Now listen closely. Listen closely. When you walk with God, when you're grounded in the faith, God helps you to see beyond obstacles to opportunity. Did you hear that? When you're walking with God, God helps you see beyond obstacles to opportunity. A while ago, I had a chance to watch a motivational speaker. His name was William Mitchell. Mitchell was 46 years old when he was riding on his motorcycle, and that motorcycle was hit by a car that went right through a red light. Upon impact, his motorcycle exploded into a ball of flames. And Mitchell was caught up in that fire. He was just set on fire. The fire burned up his face, burned off his ears, burned off all of his fingers. But because he was a man of faith, because he drew close to God, God helped him to see beyond the obvious obstacles to opportunities. And so, with God's help, he put his life back together again and moved on into opportunity, one of which became motivational speaking and the importance of faith. 4 years after that accident, he's flying in his airplane and it crashes. And that crash caused him to be paralyzed from the waist on down. Once again,